Why is motive so important in a sexual assault case? Motive is important because a sexual assault case is a case where it's usually one person accusing another person. The alleged crime occurs in a, more often than not, private setting, like in a room or in a secluded area. And so you have one person saying something happened, and usually the other person saying, well, that's not exactly what happened. I want to compare that to a homicide case. With a homicide, we have a body. Somebody died. The question then becomes, how did they die? Why did they die? Who did it? If we know who did it, did they have a defense? Was it premeditated murder? Did they have self-defense potentially? Was there beef between the two of them? All those things go to what type of homicide it was, but it doesn't go to whether or not a homicide in fact occurred. In a sexual assault case, though, what we often have is someone telling a story about what happened to them. And often it's a story that's being told after a night of drinking or after some sort of emotional turmoil. How someone is treated after the incident can affect how they perceive the incident. There are a lot of studies and there's a lot of literature on how people remember and perceive things after the fact, and it's based on multiple factors. For example, if you have sex with someone that you met at a bar and a week or two later the person is with someone else and they see you in the street and they ignore you, or they are very rude to you afterwards, or you find out the person was lying to you, or they have a history of seducing women into having sex with them and then ghosting them or treating them badly afterwards. Or another big factor is maybe as you look back at the encounter and think about it and think about the person and what you did, you might think differently over time depending on external influences as well as internal psychological influences. These are all things that affect how people perceive what they did, and this happens to both men and women, and it doesn't have to involve sexual assault. People do all sorts of things that they think sound good or they think are good at the moment, whether it's saying something to a loved one that's mean, being rude, just acting like a fool, and then later on look back at it and say, man, that wasn't such a good idea, I shouldn't have done that, I look like a real jerk. In reality, they know deep inside that what they did was wrong. So sexual encounters involve emotions, they involve feelings, and later on these emotions, these feelings might not feel the same when you're thinking about it a week later, the next morning, or several days later. The point of what I'm saying is that feelings during the event, before the event, and after the event play a role in whether an event is reported as a sexual assault, but it doesn't change the facts of what actually happened during the event. When you're looking back and thinking back about what happened in a room with a person while it's dark and you're in the mood, that's what matters. And so when you look at when someone reports, how they report, why they reported, those are all very crucial things in determining whether or not a crime occurred, because you could look back at something and say it was horrible, bad decision, and it wasn't a crime at the time. You could have absolutely consented or went with it. We hear that a lot. Oh, I just went with it. Well, if you went with it, then you consented. But a lot of women, when looking back, in our cases that we see, say, well, I went with it, but I really didn't want to do it. I really wasn't consenting. So therefore, what happened was a crime. So when you look at, was it a crime in the accused mind? Mistake of fact as to consent is important, because if a person doesn't know that they're sexually assaulting you, they think you're consenting, then it is in fact not a crime. If they have a reasonable belief, an honest and reasonable belief that you are consenting. Going back to the motive factor, motive is very important in determining why someone may change their thoughts on what happened. And motive is one of those things that law enforcement rarely looks at nowadays. Motive of the complaining witness, motive of the victim. When you look at the motives as the defense lawyer, like I do, they say you're victim blaming, you're attacking her motive, you're saying she has a bad motive or malicious intent. My response to that is absolutely. We are a lot of times saying that the person has a motive. If you have a motive to fabricate under the law, or to exaggerate, or to tell a story that is not 100% accurate, then that is something that is highly relevant for the judge or jury, because it goes to whether or not you're actually telling the truth as it happened at the time, or are you telling your current version of the truth that is being influenced by your motive. And so when motive comes up, in OSI, CID, and NCIS investigations, they often just dismiss it. For example, if someone is involved in a sexual relationship with someone else, and they get married and they have kids, and they're having sex, and then 2 years later, that woman reports a sexual assault. You could assume that they're telling the truth, which is not the way it should be done in a criminal investigation, or you could take down their allegation as facts, as evidence, and put it in your report as that's their version of events. Then you look into other factors. What has happened since then? Why are you reporting a sexual assault from 2 years later? What happened in between? What happened in between is of vital importance to any investigation. For example, maybe nothing happened in between. Maybe the person was just keeping it deep inside and they didn't want to tell anyone. That's always a possibility. Maybe after they got married and they had the kids, maybe the man started cheating on the woman. Maybe the woman has psychological issues. Maybe there's a little bit of all of these factors. Maybe the guy starts threatening to leave her, to divorce her. Maybe they're going through a child custody case and she knows that she uses drugs, and one way to get an advantage and get the kids and get child support is to throw out a sexual assault allegation. So the motive is very important, as well as the person's credibility, their honesty, their truthfulness. All those things are highly relevant. The problem is, in modern investigations, we're not seeing a lot of investigations into motive. Modern investigators rarely ask about motive. They don't really look into the complaining witness's background. They don't ask for their text messages. They basically jump to conclusions. And in the end, when the case gets to court, you have people that are falsely accused of crimes that are on trial. Their government then wonders, oh my God, what happened when their witness gets destroyed on cross-examination in front of a jury? Like live in front of the jury, the witness falls apart because they didn't do their job to begin with, and they assume that motive doesn't matter. But like I said earlier, motive is one of the most important things in a sexual assault case, and it should be investigated thoroughly. The motives of all of the complaining witnesses in the case, and key witnesses, their motives, their biases, their relationships, their credibility, their character, should all be investigated by law enforcement from the beginning, so that innocent people don't end up getting put on trial, and so that cases can be resolved justly before they get to a full-blown court-martial.